What's up everyone? Today's video we are going to react to is the history of Melee top tiers. Yet another video recommended, suggested to us, and yeah, let's check it out. Let's see the history of Melee top tiers. I feel like this video could take a lot of, different directions. So yeah, let's check it out.
This is the 12th Super Smash Bros. Melee tier list. Overall, it's a pretty decent list, but there are a few quirks to it.
Yeah,
Captain Falcon has fallen out of the top 7 in favor of the Ice Climbers, Yoshi is in the D tier alongside the good Marios, and some of the low tiers just look a little out of place.
Yeah, I mean, if you compare it to now, yeah. Like, overall, it's a solid base. But yeah, some stuff looks weird. Especially Yoshi, honestly. This is prior to AMSA, I imagine, tier list 12. Or at least maybe very early AMSA days, but probably before AMSA.
If you've been playing competitive Melee for a while, say since December 2015 when this tier list came out, you probably have an idea of why these aspects of the 12th Melee tier list aren't quite representative of Melee's metagame, at least how we think we know it today. But even if you don't really follow Melee, there is one last quirk about the 12th tier list that might actually look familiar to you. In fact, it's probably the reason you clicked on this video. The 12th Melee tier list is the first and only tier list to feature Fox McCloud in a tier of his own.
Come on!
Although Fox has sat comfortably in the first position of the tier list since its 8th iteration, the SS tier of the 12th tier list marked a new level of distinction for the character. It signaled a period of extremely high Fox sentiment, and it ushered in a new era of competitive Melee, 20XX.
Yeah, I mean, 2015, it was like, I think this was like not too long after, it was like that one tournament with like 6 Foxes in the top 8s or something. I think Hax won that tournament against Silent Wolf in Grands. But yeah, I mean, of course, as it was stated, it was the first and only time Fox was like in his own tier. Luckily, no one really thinks that these days. I mean, of course, a lot of people still rank Fox as the best character in the game, and he clearly has a strong case for it, even though I would say there are a few other contenders as well. These days, I think most people would say Marth is like a very strong contender as well. Very good character. Strong matchup spread and so on. Yeah, do Fox with it. Yeah, that sounds familiar. That's the name of the tourney I was thinking about. But yeah, I mean, of course, for the health of the game, Fox, Falco, like it's, good characters having as the best characters or, at least contenders for best. Entertaining to watch, entertaining to play for a lot of people. And, the whole punish game aspect gets more interesting for most people against fast fallers. So, I mean, good type of top characters to have, absolutely. But it wouldn't be good if Fox was like, by far the best character. So having him as the best is fine, but it's good that the consensus at the time, 2015 then, that did not end up being the case further down the road. But yeah, let's continue.
20XX is a joke/ideology which was popularized by former Captain Falcon player Aziz Haxamani Alyami, following his switch from Captain Falcon to Melee's perennial toppest tier. The theory of 20XX asserts that as Melee players get better at the game and converge towards perfect play, Fox, the game's theoretically best character, will increasingly come to dominate top-level play. Or as Toph puts it,
the year is 20XX. Everyone plays Fox.
This notion that Fox dominates competitive Melee, which to some extent he does, is an idea that has come to define Melee's cultural imprint on the world of gaming. And while Fox absolutism has always been around in some way or another, the sheer Foxaganda of the mid-2010s alongside the peak of Melee's popularity as a competitive game truly cemented Fox's position as Mr. Melee. Today, however, things have receded.
Melee.
And while Fox is still number 1, still popular, and still winning tournaments, he just doesn't quite feel as inevitable or looming as he once did. Even still, the SS tier of the 12th tier list remains a historical artifact in Melee's history. It is our fun little reminder of the time when Fox was a spooky, existential threat of a guy.
Yeah, I mean, he would have been if it actually was that big of a gap. But I mean, yeah, as we said, like, there are matchups, there are characters, and I mean, there are some matchups that, you know, you could make strong arguments for that Fox is losing. Marth in particular, we've seen, you know, players like Leffen, for example, picking up Sheik for Marth. I mean, I know Cody, for example, he doesn't, and he has gotten a lot of good wins against Sane as well. So, I mean, you could argue with both sides, but I mean, I think most people would probably give Marth at least an edge, but even if not, it's like, you know, not a clear cut, like, oh, broken to the point where you have to play Fox. So, yeah, I mean, it's nice. That's nice. Also, like, something like Falco, like, historically, I feel like a lot of Fox mains, like, for way over, like, a decade plus, I feel like a lot of Foxes have struggled against Falco. So that's, like, another matchup you could argue that Fox might be losing.
And that's why tier lists are interesting, at least to me. Despite their limitations, they're the super condensed summaries of a game's metagame history. Tier lists have always been around in one form or another since the dawn of gaming, because winning feels great, and winning is easiest when you're playing as the strongest guy, gal, or thing. And while most games these days operate on periodic update cycles that leave who or what is strongest up to ever-changing debate, Melee has been played for over 2 decades on just one version of the game. And it's not even the latest one. But even without updates, there's never been true historical consensus on where each character ranks in Melee. In the grand tapestry of Melee's tier list history, the iterative encoding of years of metagame theory, player sentiment, and tournament success reduces all of that shit into a series of tables that are 26 columns each and are easy to digest. So how does each character fare across Melee's 13 tier lists? Today, we'll be looking at Melee's top tiers. Only 2 characters have had the privilege of being graced with the #1 rank on Melee's tier list. For the past 6 tier lists, this has been Fox, but before him, a different character was the face of Melee, Sheik. Sheik and Fox have always been evidently powerful since the very beginning. During the early years, both characters held properties that smashers of the early noughts were quite fond of: high speed and movesets filled with quick and powerful attacks. And because of this, the two have a long track record of being paired closely together towards the top of the rankings. But
damn, Peach with 4? I didn't actually remember that part. Let's go, Peach. Let's go. Falling from grace. No. But yeah, I mean, I just wanted to say with Sheik, like, unlike Fox, Falco, and honestly, like, a lot of other of the best characters, I mean, of course, when you look at all characters in Melee, they are going to be incredibly different compared to if you look at, like, the very first tournaments back in, like, 2002, right? Or maybe even 2001. I'm not sure if it happened to be a tournament in 2001. But at least 2002, right? And, like, 2003 and 4 and so on, like, I feel like the character that got the most quickly their base game or whatever you want to call it, it was Sheik, right? A lot of, like, easier moves that you could connect into forward air. Down throw follow-ups was, like, even for, like, newer players and people who are trying to, like, you know, improve characters, Sheik just had an easier base to, like, find, I feel. So it makes sense she was, like, the #1 character early on. Even in PAL, she was actually ranked the first, like, the best character for a long time. And that's also, you know, worth to remember that Sheik is for sure the character that suffers the most from PAL. Like, by far.
But for the first several years of the game, Fox's strengths were seen as more theoretical, while Sheik's strengths were almost immediately practical. Compared to Fox, Sheik sported a more intuitive combo game, with moves such as down tilt and forward tilt easily comboing into killing blows, or her down throw comboing into strong hits or itself. And overall, Sheik's handle offered more ease of use, making her a relatively simpler character to control and execute with. As such, Sheik quickly became well represented in competitive play, with old school players like Reciferous, Captain Jack, and Die Superfly demonstrating the initial foundation of her metagame. But by 2006, Fox would overtake her. By this time, Fox players had begun to catch up, and as the game's competitive player base improved in skill, the theoretical aspects of Fox's gameplay slowly started to become more material. Ever since then, Sheik has made a slow descent down the tier list, with her most recent placement on the 13th tier list also being her lowest. Unfortunately, Sheik has lacked the same representation at the highest levels of play that she once had, and since her drop from number 1, no Sheik has won a major tournament during a subsequent tier list era. But things are looking up for the next tier list, because on January 22nd, 2023, 2 years after the release of the most recent tier list, Jmook became the first Sheik main to win a major tournament in over 19 years. And let me tell you, that boy is fucking spicy.
Yeah, he's such a cool player to watch.
Cross up tilt or something. I don't know. He just makes it as complicated as possible. But I was talking about Moki. Jmook is...
Yeah, the shield rock fairs, Jmook likes to do them a lot. And yeah, they just look extremely nice.
In today's landscape...
Yeah, no, Jmook is crazy good. And I mean, even though I agree with like the whole thing, like it makes sense if you look back at it. Sheik was ranked number 1 early on, then falling to number 5. I personally would say I think that's still a fair rank. Like, sure, you could argue she's better, and I wouldn't say someone is necessarily wrong if you put her a little bit higher, but I still think 5th is honestly a fair placement. Like, in terms of like her punish game, like I've talked about this before, but like I feel like, yes, her punish game against, let's say, Fox then, since, you know, very, very common character, arguably the best character, it looks easier, like probably especially to like people that might not play that much, and especially not at high level. Her punish game against Fox looks easy, and it's easier in terms of like, how do you say, inputs, right? But it's actually like so hard to consistently do what Jmook is doing. I think Cheek's punish game against Fox, or Falco for that matter, actually Falco even more, I would say is actually incredibly hard to do. And I think that's part of the reason, you know, like Cheek players have been struggling. It's almost like needed versus Fox to be like that good at the tech chase. But then you also have like some of these like kind of weird matchups for Cheeks, like Ice Climbers and Puff, that some of the other top tiers, they don't, you know, fall victim to that to the same degree, in my opinion. So, I mean, I would say, like, arguably the hardest punish game against Fox of the top characters, and having a few of those weird matchups that are actually, like, significantly harder for Sheik, and arguably lose against both Ices and Puff. That, to me, it's fair that she's 5th. Even though Jmook obviously is super good, and I'm not saying she can't compete or anything silly like that. I'm just saying I think 5th is a fair placement in my opinion.
Fox, Marth, Jigglypuff, Falco, Sheik, Captain Falcon, and Peach pretty decisively make up the game's top tier roster. But of the 7, 2 characters were a bit late to the party. The first, Captain Falcon, started out being placed 15th, 12th, and then 11th twice on the first 4 tier lists, making him a mid-tier. These lower rankings were due to the fact that his sheer ground speed made him seem incredibly unwieldy as a character, and moreover, his relatively linear recovery compared to the rest of the other top tiers was seen as a defensive blemish. But in 2003, and for several years onwards, the fabled enigma Isaiah began showing the masses what Captain Falcon could truly be capable of, demonstrating control over a character that many saw as fundamentally inconsistent. Since Isaiah, Falcon has seen healthy representation from other top players, such as the early greats Darkreign and Silent Spectre, and in today's day, the trio of Wizrobe, Nun, and S2J. While his position on the tier list has ebbed and flowed slightly, Falcon sticks close to the 6th slot. Ever since the 5th tier list, he has only dropped outside of the top 7 once. The second character to be a late bloomer was Jigglypuff, whose top tier status was the last to be ranked.
Yeah, I mean, of course this is not going to be like as true with like whenever new Smash games comes out, like whether it was like Brawl or Smash 4 and now latest Ultimate, because now like if a new Smash game comes out, people know more what to look for, right? With competitive Melee, that was like the start of like competitive Smash on like a bigger scale, right? So now when a new Smash game comes out, people know more what to look for, like punish game, edge guards, ledge trapping, whatever it might be, right? We have a strong base, and we know like these are the type of things to look for, right? So of course, like that helps a lot with like trying to measure how good or bad characters are early on. But like, not that this is super relevant to Melee now, but like I still think it's like an important aspect to remember when like new Smash games comes out, like how we perceive character strengths and weaknesses can change. Like even in Ultimate, when we had more of a base of like what to look for, you can see some characters on early Ultimate tier lists, people were completely dead wrong, and that's like even like, you know, taking patches into account and stuff. So open-minded can be, of course, important. I'm not saying it's wrong to have an opinion. This character is ranking there, but I think open-minded and like trying to see it from different perspectives can be extremely healthy as well.
Recognized. In fact, initially, Puff debuted as a low tier, ranking all the way down at 17th on the first tier list. And while she did receive a boost up to the mid-tier in the following edition, it wouldn't be until 7 iterations later that she would finally be placed amongst the top 7. The reason for her delay was pretty simple. While Melee's earlier days certainly saw their fair share of solid Puff players such as Chosen One, Kish Prime, or Killa OR, for a long time, Jigglypuff lacked a true champion who could carry her up the tier list. Her first notable jump from the 8th tier list to the 9th can largely be attributed to the Canadian player King, whose solid placements on the MLG circuit and exquisite combo game helped Puff break into the top 7. But it would be shortly after when Puff would start to see gold, after a certain Puff main by the name of Mango cropped out of nowhere and almost immediately started taking names. And then, not long after, another player would start winning with Puff as well. Hungrybox, whose streak of dominance and
that's actually crazy that he actually faded
as one of Melee's
I know, characters. Like maybe I shouldn't laugh at that. Maybe that's me, but like, I think a lot of people will admit that it's a funny clip, and luckily nothing too bad happened. But it's crazy that he actually fainted. Yeah, these type of pop-offs are dangerous. Don't do them at home. You know, I'm giving you a warning.
Funny enough, on March 31st, 2004, an April Fool's version of what would be the 6th tier list at the time was released. And of the several odd decisions featured on this version of the tier list, one particular joke would end up being not like the others. Besides Fox, Marth and Falco have the steadiest tier list histories, with both characters averaging somewhere in between 3rd and 4th on the ranking. Currently, on the latest tier list, Marth sits at a relatively high 2nd, while Falco sits at a relatively low 4th. But for both characters, neither placement is unprecedented. Since the beginning, Marth and Falco have been well represented in competitive Melee, both across the general field of play and amongst the tippy top of competition. Marth and Falco are just plain good. So, to be perfectly honest, neither character's tier list history features any particularly major stories. That being said, both characters can be used as good examples of how tournament placements and tier list rankings are often correlated. Between the two, Marth and Falco have experienced 3 slight but notable tier list winters. Before Ken, when Marth players typically adopted a very swingy, now seen as quite newbie playstyle. Before PC Chris, when Falco just didn't have the placements to justify him higher up. And finally, for several years around the era of the 5 Gods, where Marth just wasn't really winning at tournaments.
Yeah, I mean, I think this is like that type of stuff that was brought up there. I think that's also like very important in showing like, just because someone isn't currently performing with a character, that doesn't necessarily mean that they are bad, right? Like sometimes I feel like, I mean, it's hard to say, like you need to find some type of balance of like how good can a character perform actually in a tournament. Like tournament results matter to some degree, but I've personally always felt like people put a little bit too much value on tournament results and not really thinking about like what characters can and quote unquote should be able to do. I don't know. I mean, you absolutely could make like arguments and reasons for like how you should define a tier list. And I mean, no matter how much you want to like value theory versus like objective results, I mean, I think that's also something that should be like clearly defined and laid out, that this is how I'm looking at it, you know, because otherwise can be a lot of like misunderstandings and miscommunication or whatever you want to call it. But yeah, it shows that sometimes people look too much at the like tier lists. I think AMSA is probably like the very best example in Melee history of like, you know, sometimes there is a lot more to it than meets the eye.
Now, all things considered, these quote-unquote slumps are quite tame, but even still, they make a common trend clear. Lack of wins means dips on the tier list, at least usually. Peach is quite possibly the only character in Melee whose tier list position is negatively correlated with tournament success, and not just ordinary tournament success, but some of the greatest tournament results of all time.
Poor Peach.
Although Peach was placed low at 9th on the first tier list, she was quickly moved up to 4th on the second after players realized that Peach hits like a fucking truck.
Damn, that's a cool move.
Down smash is Peach's most notorious move, and when it was coupled with crouch canceling, a technique that allows characters to tank hits, Peach players could have an extremely strong counterattack during a time when players still had sloppy offense. Moreover, Peach's float cancel, which let Peach end her moves early by simply landing on the ground, allowed Peach to have a surprising speed to her offense, which let her throw out attacks quickly and safely. These perks were good enough for Peach to hover a bit below the middle of the top tiers, but it wasn't quite enough for Peach to find significant tournament success. This would change, however, with one Swedish teenager. Armada, one of Melee's greatest players of all time, took Peach to her highest achievements in Melee history, achievements which remain above and beyond anything that has been accomplished with the character since. But despite building one of Melee's best tournament resumes, Peach's placement on the tier list actually slipped alongside Armada's tournament success. From the 10th to the 12th tier list, Peach fell to a new low of 6th.
Yeah, okay, like, some more stuff might be mentioned here, but like, yeah, like, first of all, like, of course, Peach was ranked higher than Puff for a while, which did change. But the thing is also, like, one thing that's important to remember here, like, I remember before I went to the US for the first time for Genesis 1, and, like, I think at the tier list at the time, like, Peach was still, like, number 5, right? I'm pretty sure she was ranked number 5. But the important thing to remember here is that the perception that the top 4 had like a tremendous advantage over like anything ranked below 4, right? So when I went to Genesis 1, people were actually having the opinion that it was impossible to win with Peach. Of course, I'm not saying every single person in the world had that opinion. I'm just saying it was a strong idea, consensus that like top 4 is needed, anything lower and it won't work, right? Like a lot of people were using that as an argument before I went to Genesis, or as I was going to Genesis 1, that this character is not that good and you can't win with this character in the States, right? So I think it's important to remember that even though Peach have historically like fallen, you know, like 1 or at most 2 spots, that the gap is still like a lot smaller. Like, so that can also be the thing, right? So even like being ranked 7th way later, you still could be closer to the top 4 than when you were ranked 5th. And that's kind of like what happened. Because like, I remember like after Genesis 1 and people started talking a lot more about Peach's placement, how good was the character. And I think already at the time, I may have had Peach as number 7th. I don't remember, like, sure, people know I've always ranked Puff higher than most people, so, you know, 6 already makes sense. I don't remember if I put Falcon or Peach higher at the time. That was always, like, a very debated thing back then, like, is Peach better or Falcon better? I can't say I remember exactly if I had Peach or Falcon higher at the time. But my idea was more that, all right, so you absolutely can win with Peach in America as well. That's what I thought before going to Genesis 1, and it was proven right. But I still felt like the gap between the characters were not as big. Like, sure, Spacey, Smurf, Sheik were better than Peach, but I was of the opinion that the gap between the top 7 isn't like as large as people at the time felt like top 4 to 5th, 6th, and 7 were. So, and I mean, I think it's fair to say that ended up being very true of a statement. So, yes, it looks worse for Peach, but like relative to the perception at the time, this is still like a massive improvement. Because if the perception at the time was true, Peach would like honestly be not useless, but like way worse than people see her now.
And on the most recent tier list, Peach has dropped to the bottom of the top tiers at an all-time low of 7. So, what gives? Well, for one, it's worthwhile to contrast Armada's success with the character alongside his pessimism with her. Starting in 2015, Armada began to play Fox to help cover some of Peach's weaker matchups, and since then, he suggested that Peach's limitations prevent her from succeeding consistently on her own, a sentiment that has likely contributed to some diminished faith in the character. But it's also worth noting that her slip in the tier list may also simply be the consequence of other top tiers having rising sentiment. After all, the tier list order is a zero-sum game.
Yeah, I mean, I'll still say that, like, I think some of that may have been like a little bit exaggerated in hindsight, but I still hold the idea that I think for Peach mains, it's still advantage or beneficial to have a secondary. Like, that's still my opinion to this day, and people are 100% more than allowed to disagree, but I still think it's absolutely a good idea to have a secondary. Yeah, as I said, people will disagree, especially about the Puff matchup probably. I know some top players currently are still like, nah, like, it is very bad, and like, it is pretty one-sided, and yada yada. That doesn't matter too much, but like, I still stand by the fact that I think it's better for Peach to have a secondary if you want to contest for being the best in the world. Yeah, that's my take on it.
Either way, Peach's competitive metagame is far from stagnant, and relative to her general popularity, she is quite successful in the modern era, even after Armada's retirement in 2018. Will she move up one day? We'll just have to wait and see. At the end of the day, there's only so much you can actually glean from examining tier lists though. The number of decisions, experiences, and ideas that make up any given tier list are far too vast to be truly explainable. But even if the stories we tell about tier lists are mere grasps at vibes, there's still a lot of value in having such an accessible form of narrative. Because people are lazy, people like vibes, and boy do people ever enjoy sorting things into lists. Thanks for watching.
That's very true. People do enjoy tier lists. Like, we did mention Ultimate briefly earlier. Just look at, like, day 1 tier lists. People love tier lists, putting things in order. So, I mean, I absolutely agree with that. But yeah, I mean, it was a good video. It was interesting to see characters, you know, historical placements rise, you know, closer to the top in a lot of cases. Overall, very good video. So make sure to give them a follow. And yeah, thank you all for watching. I hope you enjoyed both the video and my takes on the video as well.